Hi everybody, welcome back to, I think it's week 4 of online learning. I hope you guys have had an awesome weekend. Let's go ahead and get started. We are doing a lesson today on commas in a series, so let's find out what that's about. Before we get started with that, I want to do something new. I wanted to start a little book of the week. So as we've been out, I've been doing a lot of reading. And my favorite book that I've been reading is the Harry Potter series. Harry Potter actually came out when I was your age, actually younger than you guys were. And it was like a big hit when, I guess like 20 years ago when it came out. So this week, I finished the second book, which I think is Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. So I already read The Sorcerer's Stone and then I read The Chamber of Secrets. And I believe that there are 6 or 7 books in the series. So if you're looking for a book to read, I would highly, highly encourage you to get your hands on one of the Harry Potter books because they are really, really good and really, really good for your age. So if you have any books that you're reading that you would like me to showcase on this channel, please leave them in the comments and I will make sure to put them up on the next video. All right, and the next thing. So last week for your Do Now, I asked you guys to think of yourselves as a congressman or congresswoman or a senator and think of a law that you would create if you were a congressman, woman, or a senator. And here are the things that you guys said. So we have from Jimena, I think I'm pronouncing her name incorrectly, but correct me later. If I were a congresswoman, I would make a law that said everyone deserves to be treated like everyone else. That is an amazing law. And it actually already exists. So you should look that up. But great idea. The next one is from Gracie, and she said, if I were to become a congresswoman, I would make it a law that people had to have surveillance cameras on their homes to better protect everyone. Now, this one's an interesting one. I'm not completely sure that that is legal, but interesting idea, and I would love to hear more about that. The next one is from Yahira, and it says, if I were a congresswoman, I would make a law to let everyone have an equal education given with $1,000 if go to a university or college. That's an awesome idea. I think $1,000 for every student would be great, and I would even up that to like $10,000 or $50,000 because college is very expensive. All right, and the next one's from Emedith. It says, if I were a congresswoman, I would make a law that said if more than 20 people die from the coronavirus, give the state country 1 week to prepare for a 5-day quarantine. That's pretty interesting. We are on a quarantine right now, so I would love to hear more about that, just to clarify what you mean. And the last one is from, I'm not sure what student this is, but I know that their handle is Steezy Fan Club, and they said, if I were a congressman, I would make a law of everyone in the world to get a job. And I think that's an amazing law because there are a lot of people right now who are out of work. So thank you to these people for submitting that Do Now last week. I don't have a Do Now this week. The only Do Now is maybe to submit a book that you're reading that you would like me to showcase on this video. But thank you guys for submitting that from last week. All right. So for your materials for today, just like for the past couple of videos, you're just going to need the YouTube comment section. But if you want to take notes, have a piece of paper and a pencil right by your side, which of course you do not need to submit this to my Google Voice number unless you want to. So all you need is your computer and the comment section. All right, so today's learning targets, we are learning about using commas to separate items in a series. Now, this is probably something that you already know, but this we're just going to review. So we know what commas are, and we're going to be using them to separate. So separate means to pull apart or break apart, or just have in separate, I guess, sections in items in a series. And we'll find out what these items are and what a series means. All right, so let's first talk about why do we need commas. So a lot of you guys know why we need commas, so let's just review. And I like to just use an example. So let's take, for example, this sentence right here. It says, Mr. Matthews likes cooking dogs and kids. Now, when I think of this sentence, I'm thinking that he likes to cook, actually cook in his kitchen. He likes to cook dogs, and then he also likes to cook kids. So that sentence is a little odd. It's a little weird because I'm pretty sure Mr. Matthews does not like to cook dogs and kids. But let's look at this other sentence. Mr. Matthews likes, oops, I forgot to put the S, cooking, pause, dogs, pause, and kids. Now, do you see the difference between these two sentences? One is saying that he actually likes to cook dogs and kids. One is saying that he likes three different things. He likes cooking, he likes dogs, and he likes kids, but he doesn't like to cook the dogs and the kids. So that kind of illustrates why we need commas. So we use commas to divide the sentence, making it easier to read. And we also use it to help us pause when we're writing. So imagine like you're just talking to your friends and you're telling them that Mr. Matthews likes cooking, dogs, and kids. In between those words, your voice actually pauses for like a split second. And the way that we do that in writing is that we can't really, since we're not reading this out loud, we can't really pause with our voices. So we use commas to do the pause for us. The way that I like to think about it is periods are kind of like stop signs. So stop is like a complete full rest, but then commas are kind of like yield signs. When you are driving, sometimes when you're trying to like merge into a lane, if you've ever like seen your parents merge into a lane, they might not come to a complete stop, but they might like slow down a bit and then like speed back up when it's clear to actually get into the lane. So commas are like yield signs where you just kind of like slowing down a bit, but you're not actually stopping completely. So that's why we need commas. So how do we use commas? So commas are this thing where we can use them for many, many different purposes, but the only purpose that we're going to talk about today is using commas to separate items in a series. So we need to break this down a bit. We already talked about what separating means. Items, we'll come back to that in a series. So when we're talking about a series, we're talking about a group of things. And when I think about series, I think about at least three things. Because when you have two things, you don't really need a comma, but you're going to need a comma when you have at least three things. So let's think, what are the three items that we would need to separate with commas? So the first one is we want to separate nouns from each other. So look at this sentence here. It says, Miss Coatney, Miss Beard, and Miss Stalling are all teachers in the 5th grade. So we have a series of nouns. So we have Miss Coatney, Miss Beard, and Miss Stalling, and we need to use a comma to separate those names. And we actually don't use 3 commas, we use 2 because we put them between the first and the second and the third noun. And then when we read it again, we're going to read it with a pause because like we said before, we use commas to help us pause when we read sentences. So it says Miss Coatney, Miss Beard, and Miss Stalling are all teachers in the 5th grade. So we can also use commas to separate verbs in the series. So for example, I have this sentence that says Miss Millon likes to dance, run, and eat. So dance, run, and eat are all action verbs. So I'm going to separate that with a comma. So imagine if I took these commas out, what would it sound like? It would sound kind of weird because I would just be kind of rushing through my sentence. Miss Millon likes to dance, run, and eat. But when I put the comma in, I give it like a natural pause. Miss Millon likes to dance, run, and eat. We can also use commas to separate adjectives. So remember, adjectives are words that describe nouns. So the colors of the American flag are red, white, and blue. And the words red, white, and blue are describing the colors of the American flag. So because there's a group of 3 adjectives, we need to separate them with a comma. And the last one is we can use commas to separate phrases. Now, if you notice for the first 3 of these examples, we just have like one noun or one verb or one adjective. When we think about phrases, we're actually thinking about kind of like a group of words that have been put together. Usually it's going to be a verb in like its direct object, for those of you who remember direct objects. Or for those of you who don't, it's kind of like a verb in the noun that it's talking about. So for this one, it says, I cooked dinner, did my homework, and went to sleep before 11 p.m. So if I look at this sentence, I have 3 different phrases that I'm using to separate with commas. So I cooked dinner, that's my first phrase. This is my verb, and this is actually my direct object. Not all of them are going to have direct objects, it's just this one did. Did my homework, so did would be my verb, homework would be my direct object, comma, and then went to sleep before 11 p.m. So went and kind of like to sleep would be kind of like that verbial phrase. So these are just phrases. They're a little bit longer than just using like a verb right here or just a noun. You're kind of combining the verb and a noun. So let's practice this with a sentence, or not a sentence, a whole paragraph. So this one's going to be a little bit tough because we have to know a little bit about anteaters. So anteaters, I don't have a picture up here, but anteaters are this type of animal that kind of looks like a little, I guess, bear, or like just like a small animal. So let's read about what anteaters do. All right, so anteaters live in Mexico, Honduras, Panama, and other places. So the first thing I notice is that we need some punctuation in this first sentence because I have a series of nouns in this first sentence, and my nouns are Mexico, so I need a comma there, Honduras, and Panama. So I have 3 different proper nouns, and then I also kind of have this other noun over here, so I would also use a comma to separate these nouns. All right, so anteaters live in Mexico, Honduras, Panama, and other places. They have long heads, long tongues, and no teeth. So I also need a comma in this sentence because this sentence is describing what they look like. So it says they have long heads, comma, long tongues, comma, and no teeth. All right, it says woods, swamps, and plains are their homes. So for those of you who don't know, woods are kind of like the forest where a lot of trees are. Swamps, they're kind of like kind of rivers, but they have more trees and more like moss and kind of like crocodiles live there, I think. They're not crocodiles, alligators. And then plains are kind of like open areas. So we want to put a comma between this series of nouns right here. All right, they eat ants, termites, and other insects. So this is what they eat. They eat ants, pause, termites, pause, and other insects. Their front claws tear open anthills. So I don't need commas here because I don't see a series of nouns or verbs or adjectives, so I don't need a comma there. Then they stick their long tongues into the anthills, lick up the insects, and eat them. Now this one's a little bit more complicated because we actually need a comma to separate some phrases, so we need to figure out what our phrases are. So it says, then they stick their long tongues into the anthills. So I'm going to put a comma here because the next phrase starts with another verb. So they stick their long tongues into the anthills, comma, lick up the insects, comma, and then eat them. So this is what they do first. They stick their tongues in, then they lick the insects up, and then they eat them. So that's 3 different phrases describing what they do and how they eat. And the last sentence says, if you're an anteater, you don't mind eating insects for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So this last sentence, I see 3 different nouns once more, and I'm going to put commas in between those nouns. And then I'm going to say it again just to make sure I'm correct. If you're an anteater, pause, you don't mind eating insects for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. So I would have commas here. All right, so it seems a little bit complicated, but it's actually not. If you take the time to read your sentences and figure out where the natural pauses are and what makes sense when you read it, you'll figure out where to put those commas. So let's just review. So why do we need commas? Why do we use them? We use commas to break up sentences to make them easier to read. Because imagine if we didn't have commas at all, we would just be reading through the sentence without pausing at all, without clarifying what we mean. Think back to our first example, like Mr. Matthews likes cooking, dogs, and kids. Well, if we put commas in between that, it would actually sound Mr. Matthews likes cooking, dogs, and kids. So he likes 3 different things versus he likes cooking, dogs, and kids. And we also use them to help us pause when we're reading. So think of the yield sign when you're driving. You don't come to a full stop, but you pause for a little bit to give yourself a break from reading, and then you move on. All right. And then just to review, commas can be used in many ways, but today we talked about using commas to separate items in a series. So remember, a series is at least 3 things, and then these items could be a group of nouns, verbs, adjectives, or phrases. And remember when we talked about phrases, we talked about verbs and their direct objects, or a simpler word would be like verbs and the nouns that come after them. All right, so that was the whole lesson. So now it's time for your exit ticket. So for your exit ticket today, you are actually going to be doing a little bit of writing. You're going to write 3 sentences using commas in a series. Now, you need to use your commas in a series to separate nouns, and then have a sentence that separates the verbs, and then a sentence that separates the phrases in your sentence. So if you need an example of what those look like, I encourage you to go back through the video and look at the examples that I gave throughout the video. So make sure you do that, and leave your sentences in the comment section. And another thing that I didn't put on this slide was make sure if you're reading a book right now, let me know what book you're reading in the comment section as well. All right, let me know if you have any questions. You guys have my Google Voice number, and have a great rest of your week.